Our brother Greg is going to exhort us this morning on the subject, Lessons from the Miracles of Jesus. And in preparation for his thoughts, he's asked us to look at Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. Matthew chapter 9, starting with verse 35. And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad, as sheep having no shepherd. Then said he to his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. So reads Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. So let's now give our full attention to Brother Greg on the subject, Lessons from the Miracles of Jesus. Brother Greg.
Do I need this one? For about the last 10 months now, I've had the fortunate opportunity to be able to teach the young people's class here at the chapel. And I hope that the individuals in my class have learned as much as I've learned and have enjoyed it as much as I have, because working with Tyler and Maddie and Mariah and Christian and Joseph and Gannon has been a pleasure. And it's just been so wonderful to spend time with these young people each week who are so attentive and so respectful and just so bright. And so we have been looking at the book of Matthew. And I realized as we got going through Matthew is that I hadn't really spent a lot of time looking at Jesus' miracles. And I'm kind of ashamed to say that, because it's just utterly amazing. It's amazing to read of these accounts. You know, healing lepers and healing blindness and calming storms and feeding 5,000. You know, amazing. I mean, feeding 5,000. I think about our situation, right? The Boston family. Feeding 10. What that's like, you know? We say, hey, let's have some eggs. And I'll say to Lori, I said, are we doing scrambled eggs? Yeah, let's do scrambled eggs. How many eggs do I crack? I think everybody's eating. Let's do 24 to 30. 24 to 30. That's just for 10. You know, he fed 5,000. And so there are so many different layers and levels in which you can look at these miracles, right? And there's so much to learn from each of them, and so many questions to ask, right? You know, why did Jesus perform miracles? What effect did the miracle have for the individual it was performed for, or for the groups of people it was performed for? What effect did the miracle have of those that witnessed these miracles? What does God and Jesus want us to learn from reading about these miracles? What does it tell us about Jesus' character? About why he performed the miracles, when he performed them, the context with which it happened? What do we learn about Jesus from the miracles he performed? And what was he trying to accomplish by performing these miracles? And so we're not going to be able to answer all those questions this morning, but We hope to answer a few. And so let's start with the definition of the word. Miracle is defined as an extraordinary event manifesting divine interaction in human affairs. The miracles of Jesus are recorded in the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we know that many of the miracles, you'll read about the same miracle in several of the Gospels. And the interesting thing about reading, say, a particular miracle that may be recorded in both Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is each one will maybe give you a slightly different detail, right? You might find out something more about that miracle, about the event that occurred. And so it's very interesting to look at the miracles recorded by each of the writers. And so there's, roughly 35 miracles performed by Jesus that are given to us in the Gospels. And so we know that these are not the only miracles that Jesus performed. These are the ones that are recorded. And we know that he performed many, many miracles and did many things that just are not in the Scripture. And in fact, John 21, chapter 21, the very last verse of the chapter, which is the last verse of the book of John, he says, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written, every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written." That's amazing. That's truly astonishing when you think about all that Jesus accomplished in a greatly shortened life. All that he accomplished, that we know that he accomplished, that we read about. And John tells us if they had written everything he had done, the world couldn't hold the books that it would take to write about it. So the miracles are broken down in really kind of like three groups, right? You have the healing miracles. He healed the blind, and he healed those with leprosy, and he healed the paralyzed man, and so forth, right? So healing. And then we have the second group would be the miracles, kind of control of nature, right? Calming a storm, turning the water to wine, walking on the water, right? These miracles. And then, of course, we have the third grouping, which would be raising from the dead, right? The three individuals that he raised from the dead. And, even when we talk about them, we just kind of list them and just kind of say them. And it's almost like we take them for granted what he did. And so what I want to look at this morning is I'm going to look at four separate miracles. Two of them that were healing miracles, one that was, miracle performed with his power over nature, and one, a record of him raising an individual from the dead. And so, look at these four miracles. I want to read through them, and I want to just briefly hit the highlights, right? Because we could spend weeks on just maybe studying one miracle and all that we can glean from that miracle. But I want to look at these four and really look at the lessons that are similar in each of the four, and maybe some lessons that are a little bit different that we get from each of the four. And so let's start. We're going to start with a healing miracle. We're going to start in Mark chapter 1. So turn with me, if you will, please, to Mark chapter 1 and verse 40. Mark chapter 1, starting at verse 40. "And there came a leper to him, beseeching him, and kneeling down to him, and saying unto him, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and saith unto him, I will, be thou clean. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. And he straightly charged him, and forthwith sent him away, and saith unto him, See thou say nothing to any man, but go thy way, show thyself unto the priest, and offer for thy cleansing those things which Moses commanded, for a testimony unto them. But he went out, and he began to publish it much, and to blaze abroad the matter, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city, but was without, desert places, and they came to him from every quarter." Okay, so in starting in verse 40, we see that this leper comes to Jesus. So what do we know about leprosy? Well, I'm going to read a little commentary about leprosy. The main reason why leprosy is talked about so much in the Bible is that it is a graphic illustration of sin's destructive power. In ancient Israel, leprosy was a powerful object lesson of the debilitating influence of sin in a person's life. God had given the Israelites very specific instructions on how to deal with leprosy and other skin infections. Leviticus 13. Anyone suspected of having this disease had to go to a priest for examination. If found to be infected, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. The leper then was considered utterly unclean physically and spiritually. Incurable by man, many believed God inflicted the curse of leprosy upon people for the sins they committed. In fact, those with leprosy were so despised and loathed that they were not allowed to live in any community with their own people. Among the 61 defilements of ancient Jewish laws, leprosy was second only to a dead body in seriousness. A leper wasn't allowed to come within 6 feet of another human, including his own family. The disease was considered so reviling that the leper wasn't permitted to come within 150 feet of anyone when the wind was blowing. Lepers lived in a community with other lepers until they either got better or died. So, you can see how tragic this was if a person has leprosy, right? Because this leprosy, right, it was on their skin, it was visual, you could see it. It was this horrible disease, right? And so when we have a leper here, right, we have this leper that comes to Jesus in verse 40. And what does he do? He comes to him and he kneels to him. And he begs Jesus and says, "I know that you can heal me. You can make me clean," he says, right? He uses those words, "You can make me clean." And so what do we see in 41? And this is just very impressive to me. This just tells us so much about Jesus' character. Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him. People stayed 6 feet away from these people. People put them utterly away and shunned them. And if the wind was blowing, somehow they had to get 150 feet away. Jesus wasn't worried about that. Jesus put forth his hand and touched the man. And so you think about that leper. And then you also think about all those that were around Jesus that witnessed this. As this leper comes moving forward, you can speculate that the other people with Jesus were probably moving away, right? Oh, we got a leper coming here. I can't be near this guy. Jesus, moved with compassion, touches him. And we see the faith of this man with leprosy. We see that the man knew who Jesus was and believed that by coming to Jesus, Jesus, if he wants to, can help me, can help make me clean. Clean both physically and spiritually. And Jesus tells him, he says, I will. I am willing to make you clean. Be thou clean. And we know, verse 42, and as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. Think about this man's life. Think about how he must have felt. He was now cleansed of this leprosy that kept him from everyone else. This leprosy that basically ruined his life. He's now cleansed from this leprosy. Think about how revived and charged he must have been, how excited he must have been, what he must have thought about Jesus now. And so Jesus tells him, don't tell anyone. Go to the priest and do what is ceremonially right to do now that you've been cleansed of this leprosy. And we see in verse 45, that man could not tell anybody. He had to go let everybody know what had happened. Because this was a visual thing. Anyone that knew him before knew that, your leprosy is cured. He wanted to be made known to everyone that he was clean. And so we learn, brothers and sisters, that we have a compassionate man in Jesus Christ. We have a compassionate God. And we are so thankful for this compassion. And we learn that if we're willing to come to Christ, if we're willing to work with God and allow them to work with us, that we too can be cleansed. We can be clean and be made clean by their love and compassion. And so as we continue reading on to chapter 2 now, we come to another miracle, healing of a paralyzed man. And so in Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 1, we read, and again, he entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was noised that he was in the house. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch that there was no room to receive them. No, not so much as about the door. And he preached the word unto them. And they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press, they uncovered the roof where he was. And when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, Why does this man thus speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, Why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether it is easier to say to the sick of the palsy, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise, and take up thy bed and walk. But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins, he saith to the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise, and take up thy bed, and go thy way into thine house. And immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went forth before them all. Insomuch they were all amazed, and glorified God, saying, We never saw it on this fashion. So we have large numbers of people, right? In fact, the numbers are so large here that, you can't even get into the house, right? And so what is Jesus doing there? He's doing what was most important to him, right? He was preaching and speaking to them, preaching the word unto them. These people were eager to listen and coming to him. They wanted to hear what he had to say. They wanted to hear his message. And so we have this 4 men that have this man with palsy, this crippled man that can't walk. And they want to get in that house, right? Because they realize there's Jesus Christ. This individual can heal our friend of his palsy. We have got to get in there. They can't get in the door, so what do? They figure out a way to get up on the roof, right? And lower the man through the roof. And what does Jesus say in verse 5? Or what happens in verse 5? It says, when Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven. So Jesus sees what these men have done. They see the efforts it has taken. They see what they have done for the man with palsy. And he realizes these men believe. These men have faith. They're going through all this effort because they believe that I have the power to heal, because they believe I can help their friend. And what is the first thing he does that he says to the man with palsy? He says, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. He forgives him of his sins because he knows that while it's important or it's helpful to be able to walk, it's great to heal the natural sickness, but forgiving your sins and healing you of your spiritual sickness is the most important thing. Well, verse 6. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, Why does this man thus speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? Right? So it doesn't say that these scribes or Pharisees said that to Jesus. It says they reasoned in their hearts. Jesus knew that. Jesus knew what those men were thinking, because those men were always trying to find something that Jesus was doing that was wrong. They were always trying to pick it apart. And he feels it and he knows it. And so in verse 8, immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, why reason ye these things in your hearts? He then made it very clear to them that as the Son of God, I do have the power and I have the authority. I can help this man walk again, and I can also forgive him of his sins. And in verse 11, he says, I say unto thee, arise and take up thy bed and go thy way into thy house. So he healed this man, right? Verse 12, immediately he arose and he walked. And what was the reaction of the people? They were amazed. They were amazed and glorified God, saying, we never saw it on this fashion. They were amazed by his works. And so now we have a record where we have someone, we have several characters here, right? We have all the people that have come to listen to Jesus speak. We have the 4 individuals that had enough faith and realized that, hey, if we can get this man with palsy to Jesus, Jesus can heal him. Right? We have the man with palsy who's now been healed, and the excitement that he must have felt, kind of like the leper, right, in the previous miracle. We have the people that were amazed and glorified God with what they witnessed, and were excited and charged up and believed and realized what had happened in front of them. And we have the scribes that sat there and questioned it and couldn't quite grasp it, and instead wanted to give Jesus a hard time. So who would we be, right? Would we have enough faith to take our friend to be healed? Would we be there wanting to listen and learn? Or would we be there wanting to question what Jesus was doing? Would we be there wanting to pick apart and catch him doing something slightly wrong, maybe? And of course, we have Jesus. Forgave the man of his sins and healed the man of his palsy. The third miracle we're going to look at is the large catch of fish in Luke chapter 5. So let's turn to Luke chapter 5 in the first verse. Luke 5, starting at verse 1. For as much as many have taken in hand to... Excuse me, I'm in Luke 1. Luke 5, verse 1. And it came to pass that as people pressed upon him to hear the word of God, he stood by the Sea of Galilee and saw 2 ships standing by the lake. But the fishermen were gone out of them and were washing their nets. And he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's, and prayed him that he would thrust out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. Now when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. And Simon answering said unto him, Master, we have toiled all the night, and have taken nothing. Nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net. And when they had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes in their net brake. And they beckoned unto their partners, which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both the ships, so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he was astonished, and all that were with him, at the draught of the fishes which they had taken. And so was also James and John, the sons of Zebedee, which were partners with Simon. And Jesus said unto Simon, Fear not, from henceforth thou shalt catch men. And when they had brought their ships to land, they forsake all and followed him. So we see we've come to the Sea of Galilee, right? And we have a group of people here, and Jesus sees these men who have come in, and he sees these boats. And they're, I guess, like right up on the shore, right? And they're cleaning their nets. And so he asked Peter, he said, will you push me out in one of these boats, just maybe, I don't know, maybe to get away a little bit, large crowd of people, create some space, and I can teach to these people from the boat. And you picture some people standing on the shore. So sure, he does that, and he teaches, and he speaks, and he's speaking of God's word. And then after he's done, he tells the fishermen, he said, why don't you go back out over there and throw the nets out of the boat? And they do it. And what happens? They catch so much fish that the nets are breaking, that they're having to call help to get all these fish into the boats. And then the boats start to sink, and they're amazed at what has occurred. And in verse 8, when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. Peter realized the man that he was with, how special this man was, and how he didn't feel good enough to be in his presence. He didn't feel righteous enough to be in his presence. And so Jesus tells them the greater lesson, right, to learn from this was, yes, I helped you catch these fish. I'm glad you caught the fish. But what I really want you to do is I want you to help me catch men. I want you to help me bring in others. Help me teach this wonderful message that my Father has to bring in as many as possible into the fold. And what happens? They take the calling, right? In verse 11, and when they had brought their ships to land, they forsook all and followed him. They took action. They were amazed by what they had seen. And they said, you know what, Jesus, we want to help you do it. They called them to action. And so here we have a miracle, right? A miracle that was performed that helped them naturally, right? Because it helped them gather all the fish, which Peter had said, listen, we've been fishing all night and we have not had any luck. But since you told me to do it, we'll go ahead and give it a try. And they brought in all the fish. But Jesus used this to convince these men to come with him and help him fill the nets with men, fill the nets with believers. And so the action of bringing in all those fish really substantiated to Peter and James and John and those that, this man is really who he is. This is the Son of God. He has the power to help us bring others into the fold. And so the excitement and the astonishment moved them to action. And so the final miracle is in Luke chapter 7. It's the story of the account of him raising the young man from the dead, the widow's son, in Nain. And so let's look at Luke 7. We're going to start at verse 11. And it came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. Now when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her. And he said unto her, weep not. And he came and touched the bier, and they that bare him stood still. And he said, young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak. And he delivered him to his mother. And there came a fear on all. And they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen among us, and that God hath visited his people. And this rumor of him went forth throughout all Judea and throughout all the region about. So we see starting at verse 11 that they're in a city called Nain. And Nain is located south of Nazareth. In fact, this is the only time in the Bible that city is mentioned. But we see that there's a large crowd with him, right? And they stop as they're coming to the city because they see these people passing by, and they're carrying this individual who's passed on this bier, which is like a board that they would carry them in. We know that they, when someone passed, they very quickly would proceed with the burial and so forth. And so we see them coming through, and Jesus sees that, oh, there's this young man that is dead, and he sees this mother that is weeping. All of us that are parents can't imagine, right, what this mother was going through. And he had compassion on her. He had compassion on her, just like he had compassion on the leper. And he told her, he said, "Weep not." In verse 14, and he came and he touched the bier. And they that bare him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say unto thee, arise." And the young man got up and began to speak. Well, you can imagine, all right? You can imagine the reaction of the mother. You can imagine the reaction of the son. But the people that witnessed this. And there came a great fear on all. And they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, and that God hath visited the people. It again points to the greater lesson, right? He can save all of us from death. He and God can save all of us from death. He has the power to do that. And so in conclusion, brothers and sisters, we learn a lot about Jesus through these miracles, don't we? He always did the right thing. He always did the right thing with the power that he had. I think about all the times that these people spoke out towards him in a nasty manner, or when he was, hanging on the cross, and these people were poking fun at him and yelling at him and saying the things that they were saying to him, and they doubted him, how it would have been so tempting to just do something to lash out at those people and get off that cross and just show them who you were. But he always did it the right way. He had been showing them who he was all along, but they just didn't believe it. He was compassionate. And we are so fortunate to have Jesus and God who have compassion. They have so much compassion. And we know that. This morning we're gathered here, and we will recognize his death. His death, his resurrection, the sacrifice of that perfect life on our behalf. And he always put the needs of others first. He spent his whole life doing for others, serving God, doing the will of his Father, and helping others. And through his power over the natural, he gave us spiritual lessons, didn't he? So what do we take away from this? I think there's two really big words to me that we can take away from this. And the words are compassion and action. And so we are very compassionate people, right? We have people in this room that do things for others all the time, that help others out, right? There's people in this room that have, we've had struggles, and we've had others in this ecclesia that have come to be there for us and help us, right? And while none of us in this room can heal a person with leprosy, right? Or raise someone from the dead, or perform the miracles that Jesus performed, we can't do that. But what we can do is we can help spread his message. We can help save lives. We can help others and be compassionate on others for those that don't have God in their life, that don't have Jesus and God and have not committed their lives to Jesus and God. And that is one big thing that we can take from reading these miracles that Jesus performed, is allow that action, that compassion to create action in us. Thank you.